multifamily listeners. I'm your host, Chris Salerno. Very excited to have you back on another episode of the Mindful Multifamily Show. Bethany on here, who's going to give us a wealth of knowledge. Bethany, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for having me. I sure appreciate being here.
Likewise, likewise. Well, let's dive straight into it. What are you currently working on in this market environment? What's getting you up in the morning?
Lots of things are getting me up in the morning for sure. Everybody else was not closing deals, and we still were. So we have not slowed down. So our big focus this last year was build to rent. So we have over 500 doors in build to rent right now, as well as our capital fund. So not only in multifamily and build to rent, also some debt, but we also launched into oil and gas with some longtime operator friends of ours. And
Love
so
that.
lots of things going on for sure. Get me out of bed.
There you go. Yeah, definitely sounds like you're staying busy there. Let's talk about how last year played out for you. Was last year a big year where you decided to pivot from the multifamily space? Talk to us about the multifamily, talk to us about your company and what you're doing.
Yeah, so American Made Home Solutions has actually been in business over 27 years.
Love
So we know all about market cycles. We know all about pivots, and that sometimes the need to pivot and the not need to pivot. Sometimes people pivot and there's not really a need. So through that, we actually launched our build to rent in COVID. We
Love that.
actually partnered up. We saw where the markets were going. We saw what was happening, built in a lot of contingencies because COVID happened and who knows what was going to go on with that. So during that time, when a lot of others were now going, oh no, what's going to happen in multifamily? We were stable. We weren't having any challenges or problems because we were still closing, always keeping our numbers tight so that things could still work, right? You got to have contingencies built in there. If you've been through a few market cycles, you just build in more depending on which cycle you're in when you're buying or getting ready to stabilize.
What is your main focus right now? Last year was very tough in the multifamily space. I've read multiple articles. This year's it's supposed to double and be even harder given the current market environment. However, what are you currently working on that's you guys are mainly gravitating towards?
For us, we still were doing acquisitions last year in multifamily as well as the build to rent. Our focus was more of the build to rent because we were kind of ahead of the curve. So we were looking to get our product out before everybody else was just starting to get into the game. So for us, it was working out a lot of those kinks and things, dealing with the supply chain, all of that, and then overcoming any other potential risks in that area. So that's where our focus was. And then through the year of people putting so much money on the sidelines, right? Oh, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait. And there's just so much capital sitting on the sidelines right now. That's when we said, okay, so what's the need? And the need was diversification. So that's why we're like, okay, this capital fund's got to go. We can't wait any longer. Our investors need that diversification.
Love that. And what was that diversification into? Was it into that oil and gas and your other asset classes? What was that main focus when you pivoted?
Yeah, so we added in the oil and gas, so we have an entire energy fund, right? And then we also added in debt
Love
because
that.
there's so many good operators that just kind of got a little blindsided by what the insurance companies did, and the difference of a year in extending them a little bit of capital for a year, and how that can still make their numbers work versus having to sell can completely change things for people's businesses and save their investors.
So are you seeing that more as like a rescue fund that you guys created on that?
Mostly, short term in that aspect, but also up to 2 years.
Where are you guys looking at geographically when it comes to multifamily and what type of assets right now?
So nothing's changed for us. We have always been in workforce housing, not affordable housing, workforce housing. And that workforce housing for us has always been in landlord friendly states. So we're still operating in that same mantra. We're still in Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina. None of that's really changed for us.
Love that. When it comes to operation, are you guys full service operating in house? You third partying that out? And are you guys main focus on the value add component or more of a class A type of product?
American Made Home Solutions' vision is to create sustainable growth. Now, that sustainable growth doesn't mean we come in, we do one multifamily, and then we get out of that market. We want to be in that market forever, even if we're selling particular assets. So we're also doing single family renovations and creating opportunities for our residents. But then we're also on that flip side, looking at it from the build to rent side. If this is a good market and we recognize value add, it's a good market, then it potentially could work for build to rent.
Yeah.
So on that same token, we're looking at it with a lot of our property management going, okay, we have the potential here if we really like this property management. either one, partnering with them or acquiring them and building out that property management piece of it. And that's where we've spent the last year really honing that in and really kind of streamlining. So right now it's kind of seeming to focus more on, okay, this is our build to rent property
Mhm.
management team versus our regular, and we're still working on the other side of it just because it really is slightly different. It's horizontal multifamily, still multifamily, but you got to look at it differently and how you advertise it.
No, very much so. You're spot on when it comes to that. Let's talk about the current market environment. In the whole Southeast, it's very difficult to push rents right now. Charlotte, we're based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. There's over 15,000 units that have already or that will be going online just this year alone. There's another 16, almost 17,000 in development that will be going online in 2 to 3 years from now. How are you guys maximizing your value on these multifamily properties, and what are you guys doing to really maximize for your investors?
The biggest thing, honestly, is our business model has never been set up with, oh, well, let's just raise rents and that's going to solve our problem. And so we bought the properties right. We bought them not on market, right? We weren't buying it at a retail price. We bought them at a much lower value. So we had a lot of room in there already. And then, yes, we could potentially move those rents up. But the reality is, like you just said, we knew there was going to be a bunch of inventory dumping in. Jacksonville's one of our markets. We see that, right? There's a lot of inventory dumping in. So being able to push those rents up another $100 a month, you're just not there to be competitive right now. And the reality is how much of that's going to change once they finish dumping that in the market. So it's like, okay, so what else are we doing? Well, we're reining in some of our other costs, right? We're really looking at those expenses and what about this? And then with insurances doubling on most of the properties, that's huge. That was a huge
Oh
lot
yeah.
of folks. You build in a contingency, but usually not
You don't build in
double.
that type of contingency,
That's
and then on
insane.
top of that too, you got to add the taxes in most markets, and you really got hit with a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So the difference is what folks don't realize is different states operate differently. Florida actually has a state insurance. Insurance rate in this case doubles. You actually can qualify for the state insurance.
Mm.
And so they have to put it out to market, and if they can't find a comparable quote within 20% of it, then they're required by state law to cover you. So you have the potential to do that, but not every state has that.
Wow, so
And
Florida has that law with it doubling.
yeah. So if anytime, and most people are just completely unaware, right? Because the people you're talking to, your insurance brokers, they're not necessarily going to push something cheaper. Why? Because they're not going to make a dime on it,
Oh, for
right? They're going
sure.
to put whatever product they have. And folks are just unaware that there's products like this out there. Many of the states, not only because some of the states, insurance companies just pulled out of completely. Iowa, we saw massive insurance companies leave that state. They won't even insure in that state anymore. And I'm like, wait a
Tornadoes?
minute. I know. I'm like, wait a minute. What happened in Iowa? Did I miss it? Did I sleep through it?
Is Iowa still around? I mean, we don't talk about it much, but like,
I
really?
know it's a very stable, growing market. And so I was shocked to hear how I think it was one of those things where the insurance companies are looking at their holdings over the entire country. And maybe
Mm.
it was such a small number for them that it wasn't worth
Small
their time.
profit margin. Yeah, it's
Correct.
not, yeah,
Yeah,
very
not
interesting.
necessarily like Arkansas where there's tons of tornadoes or Florida where there's hurricanes, things like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely important to find lucrative ways. And then when you get those deductions, one thing we did on a property is we went back to our lender and said, hey, we got these huge deductions. You guys are actually taking too much in reserves for us now. You need to lower
Hmm.
our payments. And one property, they lowered it almost $14,000 a month because of what we've been able to save on the taxes and insurance side.
Yeah. And people don't realize how big of a difference that is that you can kick back. The lenders are like, oh, no, it's in writing. Yeah, it's in writing, but it was based on a number that's no longer valid. So let's have
Correct.
that conversation again. And we just fired one of our $10 million lenders. We said, we're out. We are done. You guys think that you own us. And that's absolutely not true. We are the ones doing this deal, and you've sabotaged us over $1 million. And we're not letting you hurt our investors anymore. We're out. So they literally just got notice and they got fired and we're done. And we're like, nope, we will go back to where all of us have been in business 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So it's like, look, we don't have the problem pulling up our bootstraps and getting down and finding another way. We will find another way. We're not going to let them, somebody else like a bank, hurt what we're supposed to protect, which is our
You're
investors.
spot on there, and you have to protect those investors at the end of the day at all costs. And given the market environment as well, I see a lot of stuff on the headlines going out there, and I think something important is to note is that it's great that you guys been around for those type of recessions and so long. I've talked to very experienced investors as well, and no one really predicted a market shutdown like we experienced ever in history. And then no one that I know predicted where the Feds were going to raise rates, how fast they did. And in uncertain times like that, it definitely puts a strain on investors that maybe over leveraged. But did they over leverage in that current market environment? All of that you have to take a look into account, I feel, and really dive deep into situations before you can point fingers and say, oh, you foreclosed or you have to pay, whatever the story is. I think it's important to dive deep and really check all those boxes like it sounds like you guys have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, sometimes people forget back in '08, the president was literally the one coming out and demanding homeowners talk to your mortgage companies, do a modification. You can do this. This is your legal right. So people forget that we can do the
They
same
have
thing. Look,
power.
the
Yeah,
banks don't want the property back. They're not in the, asset management business. That's not what they want to do. So if they don't want to do that, it's in their best interest. So let's come back to the table and let's see what's another option here, and just to
100%.
have that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. I think all these big banks, I think all these Wall Street investors, the general population is scared, to stand
Hmm.
up to them and to communicate with them. And I think they are bullied into a corner where they're forced to do something. And a lot of these bigger banks right now that I'm seeing are just, it's just like when we hit the delete button on our keyboard, it's like them hitting, okay, we're just going to foreclose. Now, banks should not want to do that because their balance sheet doesn't look good with Freddie and Fannie and on their balance sheet. But seems like that's what they're doing is just hitting that foreclose button and really not working to turn these properties around. Because again, no one foresaw what the feds were going to do so quickly. You could not
Right.
predict it, no matter living in 1990, 2000, or '08's crash. You cannot predict that what happened last year. And I think that's when people really need to come together and say, okay, let's work this out. Let's see what the issue is, see how we can attack the issue and work this out together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I agree with you. They're scared. It's 100% obvious. But fear is a controlling factor. And how do you break fear? With knowledge, right?
That's right.
So taking the time and educating yourself and having a conversation of, well, what about this? And what about this? And the big lender that we just fired, it's a Wall Street machine. And that's exactly why we fired it. Because too many machines talking to machines and not talking to people, they can't even run their own asset correctly, and they're setting themselves up for failure. So why would we want to continue to be a part of something like that? It just
Agreed.
doesn't make sense when we
No,
don't have to.
very much so. Well said on there. Well, let's wrap things up with our path to success round, our 4 questions. Are you ready?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. One book you'd recommend.
10x is easier than 2x
There you
by
go.
Dan Sullivan.
Love it. Tell us about a situation you overcame with having a strong mindset and it turned out to be a great business decision.
Oh my stars. I always think back to it. It was 2 a.m. I'm upstairs in the single family flip. I'm bawling my eyes out. Everybody is gone and home sleeping. And I have to get on a coaching call in 5 minutes because I had to schedule it a month ago. And I'm supposed to be on a plane in 2 hours
Mm,
heading to an event, and all of which had to be pre scheduled. Right. So I had to plan ahead. I had to schedule all these things. But in doing so, I'm in a complete meltdown, and I have the choice. Do I take that coaching call or do I just not show up? And I'm like, suck it up, clean up, do whatever I can. And I did as best I could, but she could tell I was having a hard time. And
oh
she's
yeah.
like, okay, so we're not talking about curriculum today, Bethany. What are we talking about? And she basically told me, look, not everything is going to be a home run. 10% of every deal you do in a year, you're going to bring money to the table. And when she said that, it was such a mindset shift to me to go, you're right. Okay, okay, so I could breathe. I could go, okay, so let's think through this. Wow, I'm already past my 10% quota for the year. I'm golden the rest of this year. It's going to be great.
Love that.
But then
Love
I
that.
turned around and ultimately I was terrified that I was losing money, that I was going to cost my family money. And I was, in essence, hurting my family. So I felt like all the sacrifice was going to be harmful. And ultimately, that ended up being the best deal I did for my family out of all of them that we did. So it was just definitely one of those things where I had to plan ahead, but I had to stay the course even when it was tough.
Very much
I,
so. No, you're spot on when it comes to that. Talk to us about a best business decision deal you've accomplished.
that's actually another fairly easy one that at the time, I think so many people go into business thinking that they're going to do it on their own,
Yep.
thinking that that's the best thing. Oh, nobody knows it as good as I do. I just need to do it. And most of those they were great contractors. Maybe they were a great roofer. So they think they're going to go start a roofing company, but they know zero about business. And they know how to do a good roofer, but they don't know anything about business. Or they maybe they were an agent, a commercial real estate agent forever, and they think they're going to go own their own multifamily and run it all and do all this. And you don't know what you don't know. So the
That's right.
best thing that I ever did was recognize the value of partnerships and then work extremely diligently to make sure that I'm picking good partners. I've had some bad ones for sure. I've learned, right? But in the same token, I now court my partners a lot longer and I intentionally do things differently. But in doing so, we've got relationships that we've lost money together, a lot of money, and we can look across the table at each other and go, we good? We're good. And we go on to the next deal.
Love
And
that.
that's the difference for
Yeah.
sure.
Love that. Love that. Talk to us about one way you like to give back to the world.
Everything we do has a give back component, whether it's helping to build, retirement accounts for pastors or helping residents get into their first time home. Um, for us, it's more of a spiritual capacity. So on all of our properties, we have a community resource officer that we work with on an individual basis to be the hands and feet of Jesus to all of our tenants and them to one, meet the needs, but also reach them in a very real and tangible way, whether it's getting them to counseling if they've got PTSD, or whether it's getting them a ride because they're shut in and they just can't figure out a way to get out, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Love that. Love that. Phenomenal. I envy you guys on that. All right. How can people get a hold of you if they're looking to invest alongside of you and gain some more knowledge about what you're doing?
So the best way to reach us is through LinkedIn. I'm not sure if you're going to have show notes or not, Chris, but if you do,
We
I'm
will.
happy to I've got a free ebook that I'm happy to share with your audience that all about build to rent and the next best asset class and why that's such a valuable tool. So I'm happy to share that with your audience as well if they'd like
Yeah, very much so. Definitely appreciate that. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead and put those golden nuggets down in the review box to help other people gain knowledge about this episode of Wealth of Knowledge. Very diverse investment portfolio that you have, Bethany, and I hope 2024 does a phenomenal job for you and your investors. Thank you so much for being on, and we'll talk to you guys later. Yeah.